about Bell is if you look at their history in the airborne public safety space, you have to go back more than 70 years. And, Bell not only developed and fielded the world's first police helicopter and the world's first fire helicopter, we're still partnered with those same agencies today.
Hey, welcome to Hangar Z Podcast. I'm your host, John Gray. This is an episode we've been anticipating for quite a long time. Put a lot of planning and effort into making this happen. Jeff and I have noticed, throughout our own careers, and especially doing the podcast, that leadership tends to be one of the most highly talked about conversations and topics that surrounds public safety aviation. So we went out and recruited who we consider to be the best leaders in the industry, and brought them into a conversation tonight to talk about some things that pertain to leadership and how we as an industry can get better. So what I'd like to do is just roundtable and have you guys introduce yourselves, and we'll go from there. So Clay, as we go through this, we'll start with you, and Eric, we'll end with you as we go through these conversations. So Clay, if you could lead us off and just tell us where you're from and whatnot.
Okay. Thanks for having me, John and Jeff. My name's Clay Lacey. I was born and raised in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I still work there today with Texas DPS.
Yeah, thanks, John and Jeff as well. I'm really looking forward to this. Terry Miyauchi. I'm retired from the Arizona Department of Public Safety, and today I work for Bell Helicopter.
Jack Schonely. I'm retired from LAPD. Spent just about 19 years in air support and a variety of functions there, but now retired.
I'm Bryan Smith. I've just this year done 20 years, and it's all been in Florida. I should probably just leave it as a sheriff's office here in Central Florida that I'm with. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me back, guys.
Heck yeah.
Eric Weidner from Southern California. Ontario was where I worked as a police officer for 30 years. The last 16 of that in the aviation unit, and the last 8 of that running the aviation unit.
And then Jeff, we'll finish off with you.
So we were going to say we had 5 great leaders, and then maybe 1 or 2 not so great. But anyway, no, Jeff Radkovich, of course. And I spent a total of 14 years with the city of Riverside, and 9 of those were spent in the air support unit before I decided to make my great escape from California and move to Tennessee.
Yeah. Man, I look at the screen and see all of you guys on there. It's an honor to have you guys all here. And I've interviewed each one of you separately in different episodes. And, to come back and circle back to talk about one particular thing that's so important to aviation is really cool. Just the level of leadership, professionalism, and just prestige that is sitting here right now is really cool. So thank you guys for joining us. I just, can't say enough about having you guys here and the work that you guys have all done to propel not just public safety aviation, but public safety in general. So thank you guys for that. And again, looking forward to hearing your guys' input on public safety and leadership. But as with every episode, we can't start without talking about drink of the day. And for this particular episode, I actually had a cup made for this episode. It's a Hangar Z Leadership Summit Cup. So I sent this out to the guys before Christmas, and I'm sure most everybody forgot theirs, but at least a couple of us have ours. So for drink of the day, I wanted to seem a little more educated. Didn't want to drink a beer for drink of the day with all these, esteemed colleagues here in front of me. So I'm going with a Scotch whiskey tonight. It's a Oban Scotch whiskey out of Scotland. My aunt took a trip to Scotland recently and brought this back from their facility. It's something I don't know a whole lot about. Clay was trying to lead me down the path when we were in Austin with a little bit of Eagle Rare. Got some of that. But this is I guess they've been brewing this or distilling this whiskey or Scottish whiskey since 1794. So it's got the same process they've been doing forever, and it's going to be good. So excited to drink this. Jeff, what do you got?
I've got a decaf coffee with some peanut butter whiskey from the local distillery here in just down the road in Trimble. And then my Hangar Z mug is I think in the wash. So I've got Tractor Surf, keep the country from our boy Kevin. So I'm drinking his mug tonight.
Kevin Hart. And Clay, we'll go to you. And then we'll go down our normal order.
Okay, I've got my Hangar Z cup and drinking a little Coke or Sprite Zero and Tito's and lime.
All right.
It's
something a little different for you?
Yeah, it's 68 degrees here in Dallas and sitting by the pool. It's a great evening.
Wow. It was this morning at my house. It was 25 degrees. It's snow everywhere, so I'll trade you for a little bit.
That's California, right?
Well, it doesn't seem like it, but it is. Terry, how about you?
John, I am the weak link tonight. I'm traveling, just checked into a hotel, so I not only don't have my mug, I have a boring hotel cup of coffee. But it's been a long day, and it's good.
All right. There you go. Jack?
I've got the Hangar Z mug, and I'm going with the good stuff tonight. Some boiling root beer. That's the good stuff. I had a long day, too. I'm with Terry. Just a root beer tonight. But in a very nice mug. Thank you.
Yeah, right on. It's a limited release. I'll say that. But Bryan, I could probably predict what you've got, but I'm going to let you go ahead and tell us all what you got.
I would imagine you'd be right on. And, as I was rushing home from work, I called my wife and I said, "Hey, make me a thing of tea, but I'm going on the Hangar Z podcast, so break out the good stuff." So it's the good tea. It's not like crappy bag tea. It's loose leaf tea that's imported, but that's what I've got. And my Hangar Z mug apparently ends up in my daughter's hands on a regular basis. So I just sent her a text. I'm like, "Hey, where's my mug?" And I hear him stomping around downstairs trying to find it.
That's good, I guess. Eric, how about you?
Oh, here it comes.
I've got a Harlan Brewing from where, from SD, and it's a pale whale.
Yeah. Harlan Brewing, actually, I just had one of their beers the first time about a week ago. Their beer is really good. Just like pretty much everything else that comes out of San Diego. So, cheers.
That's true.
Cheers, boys.
Cheers.
All right. So to keep things somewhat timely, before we get into the meat of the conversation, I wanted to bring one hot seat question in, just because that's how we roll. So this is more of a this or that type thing, but I could probably guess everyone's answer before I ask it. But for suspense's sake, I'll go ahead and ask. Do you guys like to start assignments immediately or wait till last minute? And Clay, we'll start with you.
Immediately.
All right.
I'm immediate, but I'm typically last minute. I have a desire for immediate. I just don't.
You start immediately, but you finish last.
That's correct.
You immediately got the assignment.
I just answered both ways there, I think.
Jack, how about you?
I'm kind of like that, too. I started immediately, but I often end up last minute scrambling with finishing what I want to get done.
Yep. Bryan?
I very similar. I immediately put it on the to-do list, and then I hope to get it done when it's supposed to be done. So,
on that, your agency just celebrated their 50th anniversary. At least your air support unit did.
Yes.
And you put that whole thing on, so I'm sure there was a ton of effort that went into that. Can you just touch on that real briefly before you go on?
Yeah, there was a ton of effort, and I can't take credit for it. It was actually 2022 was our 50-year anniversary, and the first one was scheduled right when Hurricane Ian came through. So they made the decision to reschedule, and then we rescheduled it, and then the next time it was coming through was one of those really nasty storms coming in, squall lines and everything, so they had to reschedule it again. A lot of it's outside. And so this was the third time that they finally got it together, but we had pilots tonight who had been there in 1972 opening up the unit. Our unit started with Bell 47s back in the day, and our mosquito control actually still flies Bell 47s. So
cool.
we had like the Air Force has their heritage flights. We had a heritage flight with the
cool.
Bell 47 and one of our A-stars flying overhead, and it actually worked out nice. It's supposed to be earlier, but it was right at sunset, and beautiful pictures. I'll send you guys some stuff. So it really turned out well. And as I was, concerned, a whole bunch of pilots, retirees back through 50 years of aviation, the chatting and stories and stuff extended way beyond the end time for the party. So I ended up, hauling butt back here, being the last one to join on. But it was pretty neat to have it.
Brian came into this hair on fire.
Yeah. Congratulations. Well done, Brian. That's great.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
You brought up hurricanes. How did your agency fare during the major hurricanes this last year?
We got lucky. It was aimed right at us, and last minute it turned south, and those poor folks in southern Florida took a beating. Had it come through, we just had the joy of doing all the work of moving everything and shutting down and barricading everything up, to have nothing happen and put it all back in place. Certainly nothing to complain about. But it did, and as it kind of ties into the topic tonight, it did make a lot of people start thinking about what would have happened had it hit us. And it gave us an opportunity to talk about a few things that we've been trying to push and say, this is, things, capabilities that we need to have. I actually talked to Clay quite a bit about those plans. And I think it will help us be better prepared for the next time. It's Florida. It's just a matter of time before a hurricane finds us.
Yeah. Yeah, those contingencies are huge. I was fortunate in that Eric was my sergeant in the air support when I first went there. And Eric was really big on having contingencies for things. I remember you saying, Eric, you don't want your first time doing something to be your first time doing something. And I think that's huge. It seems like a simple statement, but there's a lot that goes into that, and it speaks to what you're saying, Brian. So again, Eric, it lends towards your level of leadership. You're always thinking, in front of or in advance of things that are coming your way. And that's what a good leader does. So I'd like to dig into that some more as we go and get your folks' opinion on how that works and what that looks like. But on that, Eric, let's shift to you. Are you a procrastinator, or do you like getting things done right away?
Yes.
Good answer, Eric.
I like getting things done if I have everything to get the things done. And then if it isn't something I can complete immediately, I tend to procrastinate a little bit. So I guess I'm a little bit of both.
Yeah, if I don't have the tools to finish the job, oftentimes what happens for me is I shuffle it to the back, and then I've forgotten about it. And then it's the day of, I'm like, shit. Hustling to get it done. But yeah. Again, honored to have you guys here, and this is a really cool group and cool conversation. So thanks for taking time out of all of your schedules to be here. So just real quick, we've got Terry, you're in Texas, Eric, you're in California, Jeff's in Tennessee, Jackson, Oregon, Brian's in Florida, and Clay's in Texas. So we've got quite the representation from across the country, which is pretty cool to say out loud. So anyways, Jeff, do you have anything before we hop into the meat of the conversation? Actually, I didn't ask you. Let's hop into your response.
So I learned my lesson when I got to air evac was the 135 training. We went through. I went through NDOC, NEO, or New Hire class, and you study and do everything. Learn the GOM, take all these tests, and then it culminates with your check ride and whatnot. I get to my base and finish up my orientation, and then I get issued like the next quarter's online learning modules. Well, it's all aircraft systems and everything, operation stuff and everything. And I was like, man, I just did this. I was like, well, it's not due till end of September. I'll just wait. Well, then I did it like last minute, end of September. And then like 2 days later, I get a whole nother slew of this stuff issued out that I've got to complete. So I was like, wait, okay. So now I just do it. As soon as it comes in, if I'm on a night hitch, I'll just sit in front of the computer and bang out all those classes and get them done. And then I don't have to worry about it for, 3 months or whatever. But in life in general, yeah, I'm the same way. I'll start it off and then kind of put it to the side and then last minute try and get everything done. So I think it's in our nature.
Well, again, thanks, gentlemen, for joining us, and let's get into the conversation about leadership. Eric, I'm going to refer to you again. Sorry, it's just out of experience, but I remember going to aviation, and you were in charge, and at the time we had 2 B2s. Sorry, Terry. And Eric was putting a plan, or had a plan together and in place to purchase a third B2. And you had a whole philosophy that surrounded that, and we can get into that later. But you had an organizational chart already laid out and plans in place for the growth of our unit. And obviously we weren't in a position yet to grow to that level, but you already had those plans in place and were thinking that way. And I think all of you guys are that way in your pre-planning. Terry, I know we've talked, and you have a lot of the same philosophies when it comes to planning for contingencies and pre-planning the growth of things. This question, actually, Terry, the book you gave me on leadership, it comes out of that book. So the question I'll just lead into is, how does the following quote from General Stanley McChrystal apply to public safety aviation leadership and the programs that are leading? So I'm going to read the quote, and I'll try not to stutter too much. But the quote is, "The organization we crafted, the processes we refined, and the relationships we forged and nurtured are no more enduring than the physical conditioning that keep our soldiers fit. An organization must be constantly led, or if necessary, pushed uphill towards what it must be. Stop pushing and it doesn't continue or even rest in place. It rolls backwards." So again, when it comes to, the growth of an organization and the charge that a leader must put into that effort, I think the moment it stops, like this quote says, it begins to roll backwards. So I really like this quote, and Clay, I'm interested to hear your opinion on what that means to you and how it applies to aviation.
Well, I think the quote, emphasizes the importance of leadership. And, I think to start down that path, we got to define who leaders are, right? We tend to think the leaders have brass on their collar, or they're a chief, or they're assistant chief, they're unit commander. There's leaders amongst us in peer groups constantly. For example, Jack Schonely, 25 years ago, was willing to listen to a kid that worked for Garland PD volunteering to get in a helicopter, and he led me. He led me through my career on how to become a good TFO, and a lot of my success today is attributed to him. So I think historically in law enforcement, our model for leadership and promotion, on one end you have take a test. If you're the highest on the test, you get promoted. And then on the other end, you have some variation of that. But I think it's important that we identify leaders early in their career. Identify these young men and women early in their career that have potential to be leaders. Get them the training, get them the education and the exposure to learn to become good leaders, promote them, and then see how they do. And so, on the supervisor side and the leadership side, it's that chain, right? You're getting out in front and kind of dragging that chain along. If you get at the back of the chain and push it, it's going to be in a big mess at the end of the day. So, anyway, I think it's, like I said, twofold. Who are the leaders? Those are TFOs, those are pilots, those are mechanics, those are everybody in the unit. Develop them, let them be leaders, and then find a good way to identify them. I kept it short for Terry.
Clay, you said something in Austin that I remember on the topic of leadership, and you said when it comes to law enforcement, you take a test on Friday, on Monday you're a leader, and you're expected now to.
I came from an agency that was civil service, and you could come in Friday and say, I hate every person that works in this department. I don't like anybody here, and I'm a social misfit. And you could take a test and on Monday morning have 8 to 10 people under your watch. It's ludicrous. I mean, it's absolutely insane that that's the way it's done. But yeah, it's crazy.
How would, in your ideal world, how would you identify those leaders that aren't leaders yet? They're TFOs, they're officers. And then once you identify them, how do you start preparing them for that next step of leadership?
Well, I think the way to identify them is by seeing their work ethic, seeing their integrity, their honesty, how they're committed to the job, their empathy towards others, how compassionate they are for their teammates, and are they there for them? And then, there's tons of resources. I'm not a big federal 3-letter guy, but man, the FBI LEADA schools, the APSA stuff, I've learned about leadership from every guy that's on this panel right now, through ALEA and APSA and that sort of thing. So there's resources out there. I think it's the culture that needs to change to identify that this 3-year TFO is a fantastic leader, and we need to develop him there. We tend to tie it to seniority and testing and all this, or stick wiggling. Oh, he doesn't have an ATP. Who gives a crap, right? What does having an ATP have to do with being a supervisor? So anyway, that's how I'd work on it.
Okay. Terry, I'll shift over to you.
You bet. First let me say, Clay, I appreciate you allowing Arizona to follow Texas in this regard, so I'm going to try to keep it short for you back. Two things, John. First, I love that quote. I had actually forgotten that you and I had talked about that book. It's one of my favorite books and probably one of my favorite quotes. I've kind of morphed that into what I would say is one of my favorite sayings, and that is, if you're not growing, you're going away. In other words, we as leaders, we have to make this continual push to improve, to expand, to develop, et cetera, because if we're not, we are probably going to roll back downhill. And especially in our government bureaucracy, politics, budget constraints, et cetera, limited resources, if we're not pushing for more, someone else is probably grabbing for ours. And it's our job as leaders to push that. I love the comment you made about Eric, had a proactive plan to grow. I think that's essential to stay where you are today, let alone not go backwards. And to tag that on to what Clay said, I don't think we do a great job of that in police aviation. I think we do a great job of training, technical and operational, and I think we are really good at that. And we perhaps don't put that same strong focus on developing leaders that have that type of mentality. So, love that quote. Love what Clay added to that.
Terry, when we were in Reno, I sat through one of your leadership classes, and you talked about. Well, let me back up. Leadership is it's not the same as safety, right? You can say you're focused on leadership, you're focused on safety, but there's a difference between actually being focused on it and making it happen and just saying that, right? Just like Brian, you had brought up with safety. Brian or Terry, you had brought up in that class, you actually were able to take some metrics with Arizona DPS and figure out how to push your agency, how to get better. Can you talk about some of those metrics you guys identified and how you use those to push your agency to do better?
Yeah, I can, and more so maybe the rationale behind them. There were some perhaps unusual metrics of, your staffing count, your operational and service, some safety type stuff. But really, the emphasis behind that is how you move those metrics. And every agency, every leader is going to perhaps have different metrics, and I'll actually tie this back to the quote of the general where he talks about, it's not just your physical training, et cetera, it's your people. And that's the key to moving any of those metrics, is tapping into those people and tapping into their ideas, their drivers, their motivators, and that force multiplier aspect that the follower, if you will, can bring to that. I don't want to get too far down a rabbit hole here, but when leaders don't do that, it becomes a leadership of self and not a leadership of others. And it, let's call it what it is, ego maybe. And you lose that force multiplier effect, impact, and you lose that ability to move those metrics, regardless of what those metrics are.
Yeah, I remember you talked about that in your class, and I walked away like that's kind of an epiphany. A good leader, one, surrounds themselves with people that know things that they don't, right?
I'm surprised you showed up in that class, John, let alone remembered anything that I said. Just
threw me off track. But when a leader puts the people that he's leading in front of themselves, and as far as providing the things for them to get better at whatever their job is, it really makes that leader look well, and then it makes the organization look good. And all those metrics that you're using to measure what effectiveness is all those things come up. They jump up, all because the leader has put the people he's leading in front of himself. I think that's a great way of looking at it, and Terry, I really like that philosophy.
Bet.
So, Jack, you and I and Jeff have talked at length about leadership and the lack of leadership for the most part, and not only law enforcement and public safety aviation, but in law enforcement aviation. So I'm really interested to hear kind of your take on this.
We have talked about that and the importance of it, and when it's lacking, how dangerous it can get. But let me start by just saying thank you to Clay for the kind words, and what I must have done something right, because what he said is about leadership not having to do with stars and bars is so accurate, especially in specialized units and especially in aviation. And I want to also follow up and say Terry hit it on the head when he said we're really good at the mission stuff and getting good at that stuff, but we lack in we ignore sometimes the leadership part of it, and we're missing out by doing that. A book that comes to mind to me, I haven't thought about this book in a while, and when Terry was talking, it just hit me. It's titled The Mission, the Men, and Me. And it's by, I can't remember the author, I want to say Berg, but he's a Delta commander. He's a Delta Force commander. And the mission, the men, and me, in that order. And what I have found is that so many leaders that I've worked for had no concept of that. It was me and then everything else. And it was like, you're getting it backwards. The mission is the priority. The people that are doing that mission, the men and women in aviation, law enforcement aviation, are important. And then you're last. I mean, it's so important. I look back on all the, supervisors in general, sergeants, lieutenants. In my unit, it was big enough where we had sergeants, lieutenants, and then we had a captain. And I had 9 different captains over my 19 years. 9. Only 3 of them were aviators. 2 of them actually flew helicopters. The other one was a fixed-wing pilot. But I got to see a wide variety of leadership, or lack thereof, and the good ones follow that mission, men, and then me, and they also would listen to their subject matter experts and the leaders among the unit. And some of those leaders were the lowest ranked people in that unit, and they were incredible leaders. And it was fun to pick those people out in places where personally I could have some influence to say, oh, this guy, this TFO is going to be an amazing leader. And I knew it immediately just from the things that Clay was talking about: honesty, work ethic, dedication, putting themselves last, putting the mission and the work first. So it's a complicated topic because there's so many layers to leadership. Yeah. It's not just the chief. In many cases, the chief's mildly interesting in this conversation. It has to do with the people you're around, and sometimes they're the same rank as you or even lower. And I just truly believe that, and seen it many, many times. And I think this is a really good conversation to have because it's important.
Yeah, there's almost, you brought up identifying a good TFO and knowing this person's going to be a leader. In law enforcement in particular, we almost have this structural flaw with most agencies to where if you promote beyond the level of an officer or a corporal and you're currently a TFO, you're going to be taken out of aviation entirely.
Yep. And
you may or may not make it back to aviation. So those leadership traits that you possessed and that were cultivated when you were there may be lost, And I don't think there's a perfect answer into how you solve that, but, it's something to think about, as agencies think about this process they put in place.
That's how our unit was. We had, and many of you know George Gonzalez. He was one of the best TFOs that place has ever had. And he left and came back as a sergeant. And that was a roll of the dice. He that was his goal, but that's how our department was. If you make sergeant, bye, you're leaving. And then you have to fight to get back, and you have to time it. What sergeants are retiring? Are there going to be openings in the next 10 years. You know what I mean? And he timed it where he was able to get back. It shouldn't be that way. If he's an outstanding leader, and he should be able to get back, stay, or at least get back easily. We want leaders like that.
Yeah. Clay, I see you're nodding your head over there. Do you have any suggestions for agencies that are in a position to change how they promote internally in aviation?
We're a big organization, but everybody promotes internally, and I think it's extremely important. The chief pilots out there flying missions, the assistant chief pilots, majors, captains, lieutenants, all the way down. So now, a smaller unit, Eric, I'd like to hear when his turn, or Bryan. That could be difficult in a smaller unit. You may not have the pool, but I think the folks leading need to have some skin in the game on the mission and the men and women doing it.
Yeah. While we're on the topic, let's jump to Bryan and then Eric.
I wanted to go back to, the quote that you originally had, because I'm not familiar with the book. I'm going to have to look that up, but it strikes a chord with something that I have taken to heart from a long time ago. And we talked before. I spent a lot of time before I was in law enforcement over in Asia. And one of the philosophies that sort of kind of opened my eyes was this idea that nothing is static, right? Nothing is ever set. It's always it's either growing or decaying. It's never set. Even they would say a stone is even decaying. You just can't see the speed of it. And I believe, as everybody here has said, that reflects an organization. And we can sit in these leadership classes that we put on, and everybody comes in, and we have some contractor come in and talk to us about leadership. And everybody says, yeah. We can't do things because that's the way we've always done it. We got to change, and leadership's important. But then we go back into the real world of our law enforcement culture universally, and I'm not just talking about my agency, or not specifically, but in general. And I've worked for a few different agencies. It's just kind of the culture that doesn't go and gel with this idea that we need to be willing to look at ourselves and change and move forward and progress, and that leadership's important. You have to have the right people, because we set up in this strict, brick and mortar. This is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. If somebody has this decoration on their shoulder, you do whatever they say. You don't ask a question. If someone has been given that decoration on their shoulder, then they know how to do it, and they know how to be a leader, and that's unquestionable. And you are not in a position to have an idea or have a suggestion on how to change it, because that's not your role. And this is how it is. And if you don't like it, go find another job. So we don't allow people to lead. We put them in a position, in leadership positions, and then we don't allow them to take things and continue to push it uphill and to continue to improve it, because that's not the status quo of how we've always done it and how the people in the positions that they're in got there. And it's scary to think of that being changed, especially in an environment where we hold on to the past and hold on to how things have always been done with both hands, while we're saying, no, we don't do that, and we're willing to accept change. I think there's a deep cultural element of law enforcement that is resistant to change. And if we're resistant to change, we're resistant to leadership. Because at that point, all you're doing is managing what's existing to begin with. You can't lead if you don't have the ability to push it forward and improve it. And if we're not pushing forward, we're rolling backwards. And we see that. We see that with a lot of law enforcement, not just aviation, where management styles, people are having trouble with recruitment. Well, we want college educated, highly capable, smart, professional people to come in, but we're going to treat them the same way as we did in the 70s. Well, no wonder they don't want to come to this. They want to use their intellect. They want to use the skills that they've learned. They want to be a leader, but I'm not going to let you be a leader. I'm going to put you in that place and call it a leader, but it's just a management position. There's a difference, like Clay said, and the ability to do it. We talk about it in teaching all the time, right? Jack and Clay have taught for years and do a phenomenal job. but it's not just because they know how to do it, because there's lots of people who know how to do it and can't teach it. The ability to teach it is something extra, it's something different. And same thing with leading. Just because you're good at something, just because I'm a good pilot or a good TFO doesn't mean I'm a good chief pilot. And, you know, some of my guys may listen to this later and laugh and say he's finally accepting it, but, you know, as the case may be, you know, just knowing how to do a job doesn't mean you know how to be a leader in it. You know, at best, again, maybe a manager. So we don't give people the real leadership skills. We just tell them, hey, now you're this rank. So that means you're the leader and everything you say is right. People should start listening to you. And again, this to be threatened by the people below you if they have an idea. You know, I like the ideas you learn in the leadership classes, flatten management, and then in engaging people and authorizing people to do stuff and give them projects, and that will really bring out, you know, everything they have to offer beyond that sort of line level job that they've been assigned. That sounds great in the classroom, but you try to put that in a law enforcement world, it's very difficult. A book a friend gave me when I got this job as chief pilot, he's a high-ranking guy in the Air Force that I worked for part-time years ago, super great guy, and he gave me this little tiny book called A Message to Garcia. And it was written like in the late 1800s. It's just an essay about, and it's, you know, the guy, it's supposedly a true story, but it's more important. The message that he gives is this guy is just given a job, and during this Spanish-American War, I believe, this message needs to get to Mr. Garcia in Colombia. And he says, yes, sir. And he just goes and figures it out, because he was given the opportunity to go do the job. And it also talks about the work ethic of someone who's given a job and goes and doesn't look for excuses to quit. And he says, and he wrote in the beginning of it, I hope you have a unit full of Garcias. And with the idea, you need to engage these people. You need to let them be leaders and go beyond just sitting there and waiting to go fly. But it's easy to say, it's really difficult to do in the culture that we have.
If you're going to identify one way of, you know, tactically drawing that out of people, you know, what would you recommend for people that are in that position?
As far as the person in the leadership position, or
if you're a leader and you identify somebody in your ranks that looks like they have a lot of potential as far as leadership goes, you know, how can you enhance that and draw that out of that?
I think what I found is just there's always projects, especially in aviation. There's always some project going on. Give them some projects, you know, give them something to do. Hey, you know, or challenge them to get like a flight instructor rating or something like that. And then once they do it, start, you know, pair them up with somebody, you know, rewrite the TFO training program. We need to purchase this major piece of equipment. As a chief pilot, I don't need to do all that. And it's not me just, this is beyond just shucking off work I don't want to do, but give them something to do. Give them a project. You know, we're trying to incorporate fast rope and long line into the new aircraft we have, which we haven't before. And there's a lot involved in bringing in a program like that. And I'll be honest with you, I'm dying to do it. I'm like, I can call this guy and I can call this guy, and I know we need this. But I gave it to one of the guys in the unit. I said, you know what, this is your project. Here's the stuff we need. And he's super excited about it. He's calling these people. He's getting quotes and getting the experience of doing those things. And it's really drawing that out and bringing out the leadership qualities in him, just in a simple project like that. Buying uniforms, you know, it doesn't seem like a big thing. We need to get uniforms. We need 3 different ones. We need quotes. We need to try them out, get sizes, you know, research these things. Hey, you know, this is your project. Go ahead and do it. And then I'm not going to look over your shoulder the whole time. You know, at some point I've got to look at it, but it's just little things like that. And often we're reluctant to do it. Also being willing and giving them opportunity to give you feedback. And I've had lots of projects over the last 5 years I've been at this unit, and I've had guys come in the room and say, hey, I don't know about this one. You know, I don't know if that's going to work. I say, great. What's plan B? What do you got? And try to incorporate those things just to encourage them. Once they feel encouraged, then they'll start coming to you with more ideas. They'll feel like they can do it. And you really do see the leadership thing. It's not for everybody, and that's cool. But you see the ones that really bite into it. You're like, yeah, that guy, he's got some potential. So when I have my stroke one day, we know who we can give all this job to and have somebody to take over. Any day now.
I like that. And, being from a smaller unit, each one of us carries a lot of collateral duties. And, when Eric gave me an assignment, a collateral duty, I liked it. It brought a different flair to the day. I'd come into work. It was, of course, flying is the highlight of it. But when you come back and there's a project you're working on, there's a lot of satisfaction, at least for me, that came out of successfully completing that or finding a new way to do something. So I think it's motivating, to get these projects and finish them successfully. To flip the coin a little bit, Bryan, and then I want to transition back to what Jack had said, and we'll go to you and then Eric. To flip that, if you've got an employee who's not performing, and maybe they're not leadership material, but as a leader, you see this employee that's not performing well, but they're capable. What can you do as a leader to kind of spur their growth and maybe get them back on track?
I think something that I try to remember, and I won't say that I'm not guilty of forgetting sometimes, is the people who come in to our world, into the law enforcement or public safety aviation world, are very motivated people, motivated by certain things in their lives. And in general, they're smart. We may not always act smart, but
that's for sure.
There's an intellect there. We're not common folk. This isn't the normal person job. This isn't attractive to normal people. And there's a lot of motivations. And if you can just find what that spark is, what that thing is that motivator, that thing that they really like and enjoy, why they got into this job, a lot of them are smart people. And there's nothing that is more frustrating for a smart person than to be put in a position where they're treated like a dumb work animal. It's insulting. It's demotivating. And, they get down. So give them an opportunity to exercise that skill set. And the difficult part for us is to find what that skill set is. Not everybody's a good instructor, but some people are great instructors. Not everybody's good at managing a project and getting the quotes and finding the parts and doing all that. But some people are very good at it. Why did they get into this job? What are the things they like to do? Even sometimes their hobbies will hint at the things that they like to do. Who are the techie people in the unit? And who are the non-techie people? You can't give the non-techie person the techie job. They're going to be miserable. And try to play to those things, and then they'll be more naturally motivated towards it. There's always going to be the caveat. You'll have someone who has just lost all motivation and love for it. And I have a hard time with that personally. I don't have a whole lot of sympathy like all of you. I had to struggle to get into this. There's not many positions in doing what we do worldwide, and I don't think that they should be wasted on people who aren't in love with it. So if somebody has truly lost their love of what they do, they are occupying a space for somebody who really deserves it. And I think it would be on us, and it's a crappy part of the job, to help them find the door. And it's dangerous. Yeah. It's dangerous for us. It's dangerous for the people we're supporting. There's just no room for that. But I think in most of the cases, you can find a way to motivate somebody, especially the passionate kind of people who get into this line of work.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me, Terry, of another thing you said, and I'm going to get it wrong. I think the saying is you either manage up or out. Is that correct?
Yeah, you bet. So you're either managing up or you're managing out. Anything in between, is potentially not leadership at all. And so if go back to the general's quote, if we're pushing up the hill as leaders, we're managing those people up, we're developing them, we're training them, we're getting them to the next level. And to Brian's point, when the employee has lost their way and they need to be managed out, it's our job to manage them out. And anything in between is, again, it's not leadership. I want to, if I can, John, just comment on something else Brian said. And, it's that, I think what he was saying was that empowerment, whether that's the authority of a project or, a special tasking, whatever. Empowerment it's huge, but there's a part of that so often I think as leaders we miss. Empowerment is also removing obstacles. What's standing in that employee's way. And I would even add to what Brian said, it's not our job to figure it out sometimes. It's our job to communicate with that individual. And it might be as simple as asking him, hey, what do you need? What do you want? What makes you mad? In regards to that obstacle or in regards to that project. And what might seem foreign to us to try to figure out, he's dying to tell us. And us as leaders, we just have to simply ask at times and have that culture that allows them to respond to us so we can then empower them and remove those obstacles that are potentially in their way.
To expand on it a little bit, and again, it was, what do you want and what makes you mad? Is that what it is?
It's any version you want, but what I use is what do you need, what do you want, what makes you mad?
That's right.
Those three things.
And you gave an example. It's simple, but I think it hammers the point of the mechanic and the problems you're having. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, all kinds of examples. The one that perhaps relates the emphasis the easiest. We had a rash of hangar accidents, right? Essentially, our technicians falling off the ladders in the hangar and getting hurt. We had a period where we're averaging about one a year of that. And it was a big issue. What are we going to do to stop this? And so we literally, and there's a whole story to it. I'm going to give you the short one. We went to those technicians, said, "Hey, what's it going to take to get you to stop falling off these ladders?" Well, sir, they make these helicopter platforms that are designed for the make and the model, and they have these nice safety railings and cushions so we don't get as tired. And that broke this 8-year span of accidents cold turkey. And it was literally as simple as asking them, and so the follow on is, why haven't we bought these in the past? Well, sir, no one ever asked us. No one ever asked us what we needed in this regard. Expand that to what they want. Ask them what motivates them and ask them what makes them mad. And when you have that culture in which they are allowed to answer that and allowed to answer it freely, they will come screaming to you with those answers, and you'd be amazed at how much you can learn and then how much you can move those metrics, if you will, how much you can push up that proverbial hill.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we get really deep in the weeds and come up with all these philosophical answers to what leadership should be and how do you fix problems. And we never stop to think, hey, what do you need? Like that simple question can solve a lot of problems, and it's not asked a lot of times.
Well, and I'll take it just one level deeper real quick, John. So why don't we do that as leaders? I think the number one obstacle that we as leaders typically have, we get ourselves in the way of that. Our ego doesn't allow us to do that. I'm in charge. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to give the orders here. I'm the one that is smart. And you're foolish when you're in a room full of people that you're leading to not tap into that resource and to think that you have all the answers. That's let's call it what it is. Ego is a killer of leadership, effective leadership.
Brian, I see you raising your hand.
Couldn't find the mute button. Just add on to that. Through the when I was with the safety program with APSA for 10 years, I get emails constantly from members asking for help. And I would say the majority of them, the vast majority, were people dealing with exactly what Terry said, where they were dealing with an issue and they had a supervisor who just refused to listen to them. And they were right. Their conclusion was right. And it was the whole span of problems you could have at an aviation unit, from personnel when people should leave, who should be allowed to fly, should we have flight suits? I mean, it was everything. And they would write me out of frustration and say, hey, this is what they're trying to do. And I would take that email and put it on APSA letterhead, maybe wordsmith it a little bit, put my name on the bottom, send it back to them, and send it back to their supervisor. And 95% of the time, it was very rare, I didn't get an email back or a phone call saying, hey, that worked, thank you very much. And I wasn't saying anything different than they were. And usually I didn't really change it that much. But it was just because it wasn't coming from, and I hate the word subordinate, it wasn't coming from their subordinate, so it might be something that's worthy to listen to. And again, this going back to this culture of law enforcement globally, of it's weak, this idea that it's weak as a leader to listen to your people. And we further complicate that in aviation by having a very specific and complex skill set and profession, and then putting leaders over it that have no background in it. And it puts them in a place where ego, it's a trap. And suddenly you know nothing about what's going on, and these people are coming to you all the time with this stuff. And if you combine that with this unhealthy culture, this leadership culture, you don't want to listen to them. You know, some days it feels like someone could say, hey, the sky's blue. No, it's not. No, sky's not blue. And okay, well, the APSA guy said the sky's blue. Okay, well, yeah, I said the sky was blue. It's so frustrating. I mean, again, I'm rambling on at this point, but I just wanted to carry on with what Terry said, that, you know, a lack of willingness to listen to people who are working for you. And pilots, you know, we can't point the finger at anyone else, because then we turn around and don't listen to our maintenance people. And we think we know everything about maintenance. And we try and make those decisions when, exactly like Terry said, sometimes we need to sit back and say, you know, hey, what do you need? I don't understand this, or I trust, you know, this is how it needs to be because you're the maintenance professional, not me.
Yeah, I like it. Eric, you've been patiently sitting up there. You know, mother, your
Are we
last
still
name
doing
puts you
this?
in-
Is this still on? And Eric's got those cool aviation sound effects going. I love it.
Eric, before you answer the question, I want to kind of have you hear your answer, but Clay's question to you and to Bryan about structural or promotions and what that looks like in smaller units, and kind of what your response is to that.
Well, yeah, it's a great point, and I think it's largely dependent on the agency you work for, the size of unit that you have. Texas DPS is in my opinion, one of the best examples of how to run an aviation unit, because they're an incredibly professionally run aviation unit, and they don't cut corners. They don't kick people out the second they go up one rank and then expect to retain that institutional memory and knowledge. They foster that and they build that within the unit, and that's incredibly important. The reality is, like so many of these other guys touched on, every agency isn't like that. And there are many agencies where the old indoctrination is that the best way that we can make you a good leader is to make sure that you know how to do everything. And so we're going to keep rotating you through all these different assignments, and somehow that's going to make you a great leader. When in reality, we all know that that's the furthest thing from the truth. The assignment has nothing to do with your ability to lead or to manage personnel. And with regards to aviation, there was a lieutenant for Newport Beach here in Southern California. His name was Bob Oakley. And I remember him saying that in law enforcement and in every other specialized unit, whether it be narcotics or whether it be motors, traffic, it's police officers and they're just doing a specialized detail. He said aviation is the one specialized unit where you are beholding, or you have to abide with the FAA codes and regulations. And if you do all of those things correctly, you can then go out and do police work. If it doesn't work, it's not. He says in every other specialized unit is the other way around. You're a cop, and just because you're a cop, you can go do these other things. And aviation is different. And that always stuck with me, because I think that's lost on a lot of administrative level personnel in our departments. It's lost that this is different. And, that's a different as a 4-letter word in law enforcement, because we're all supposed to be the same. And the second you say that you're different or special, you're a prima donna, or you're high maintenance. And the reality is, it is a very specialized discipline that requires you to abide by an entire different set of rules and regulations that have nothing to do with your status as a law enforcement officer. And so I think understanding that just every agency is going to be different, and how you tackle yours is part of the solution, if you will. I was very fortunate to be given leadership of our unit under a young chief who had a very different philosophy on how the department was going to be run. And I remember him saying that we are not going to do things because that's the way we've always done it. And if you know of a better way of doing it and you don't speak up, you're part of the problem. And so I was fortunate, because in taking the reins, I knew that was kind of the attitude. And so that allowed me to kind of look at where I thought we should be. And in response to the original quote, I couldn't agree more. My philosophy was always, if we're not evolving and we're not analyzing what we're doing and we're not making it better, we're going backwards. That's just the fact, because you cannot, and this came from the time I spent in canines. What that taught me was, you could have 5 or 6 or 10 finds in a row, amazing searches where your dog finds a suspect and either apprehends him or he gives up. And then you have one where your dog, for whatever reason, usually it was your fault because you didn't put his nose in the right place, but you miss a suspect. And that's kind of what people remember. And so I used to always tell, when I was training in the canine unit, I would tell the new handlers, you're only as good as your last search. So you have to constantly try to strive and reinvent yourself and perform at your very best, because people aren't going to remember all of the great stuff you did if you then turn around and, shit the bed, excuse my language, but that's what they're going to remember. And so the motivation has to be to constantly push yourself and try to evolve, because that's what people are going to remember. They're going to remember what happened. What have you done for me lately, as the saying goes. And so, it is finding things that people are passionate about. Like Bryan said, we had a guy who was actually a really good welder, and we had welding gear. We had a TIG welder, we had a MIG welder. And I told this guy, hey, if you need stuff from the welding shop, we've got an account, go get it. And he ended up making us platform chocks and aircraft chocks and light stands and, on duty time. And I was going through old photographs, and I have a photograph of him welding in his flight suit. And these sparks are coming off everywhere, and he's got a welder's hood and a jacket on. But that was part of what I believed made us as a unit successful, was finding these things that each person was good at, and then promoting that and giving them a chance to utilize that skill or build on that skill, or giving them an opportunity to go learn something they wanted to learn and be good at it, because ultimately they would bring that knowledge back to the unit, and they would make the unit better in turn, and in turn the department. And that was always my kind of philosophy. So, and I also adopted, you were talking about us expanding our fleet. And I had remembered reading something about, you can think any thought you want, but if you say it out loud, you instantly make it intentional. in essence, you notify the universe that this is an intention of yours, and whether you believe or buy into all that stuff or not, is irrelevant, but it does something to your mindset. And so we had a director of finance, and every time I'd see him at an event, I would make a comment to the effect, when you buy us our third helicopter, and he would always kind of, just kind of brush it off. And one day there was one of the guys with me, and I said something to him, and he says, "Why do you always say that to him?" And I said, "Because I'm going to say it so much that he's eventually just going to get used to it, and it's going to sink into his mind, and he's just going to go along with it." It wasn't quite that simple, but there was a lot of intention involved in what I did, in trying to create avenues and relationships. Scurrying around the show floor at a APSCA conference or HAI, and snatching up every calendar I could find, because then I would take them down and put them on every desk of every lady in purchasing or procurement. And you would have thought I'd put $100 Nordstrom gift card on their desk, because nobody ever went down to their little basement hole thing and even acknowledged them. But what I found when I did that was, when I had a funding issue or I had a bill issue, when I picked up the phone and called them, they couldn't do enough to help me with whatever the issue was. And so there was a lot of evolving internally and identifying the strengths of each one of the members in the aviation unit. And then I think every aviation unit needs to look at their viability. And some aviation units are very fortunate in that their viability is kind of cemented into the framework of the organization to a certain degree. But there are a lot of, I think the majority of aviation units that are kind of feel like they're constantly struggling to figure out how to remain viable and how to not end up on the chopping block. And so I think that was a focus that I always was looking at, is how do we remain viable? How do we continually be something that's productive to the city of Ontario, not just the police department. We did a lot of stuff with the fire department, because everybody knows fire guys got money. The fire guys always have money. And I thought, we can do a lot of stuff with them. And if they're on our side, that's never bad. So it was all about, I used to always use the weed analogy, where I remember picking weeds as a kid, and I would love the ones that had one root that went straight down, because you'd grab it and the whole thing would come out instantly. But I couldn't stand the ones where the weeds went in all different directions, because you'd pull the top off and then you'd have to get a shovel or something to try to dig the weed system out, the root system. And I said, that's what I want to be. I want aviation to have a root system like those weeds that were a pain in the neck to get out of the ground, that went in all different directions, and that went through development and engineering and the fire department and whatever city resource or department was involved. I wanted to have a relationship with them and let them know that we could be a resource to them. So sorry, that was a little bit off topic, but just kind of the general philosophy. Then it goes along with, you got to keep moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And before you brought up the root analogy, I was going to bring it up because that's what kind of came to mind as you were talking about that story. But oftentimes when I think of leadership, I'm thinking of the leader down and how they affect the people below them. But obviously, there's a relationship, a dynamic that needs to take place where you're influencing and affecting the people above you as well, not just within the police department, but in City Hall, in Ontario's case. And you were really effective at doing that, and you kind of described how that worked. So I think it's just great that you consider leadership, like Terry said, you're managing up and you're managing out. It's kind of maybe similar, but it's not just people below you. It's you're waving the flag of the people that you're leading as well, and that's going up. So I think that's a great time for that. Terry, go ahead.
Eric, I trust that was a Bell calendar that was so effective for you.
I knew that was coming.
It was a non-denominational calendar, Terry.
Bell calendars for anybody out there. That's all it takes.
From 2018.
Yeah.
John,
John,
you do know how lucky you were to have that man that's next to you on the screen and
absolutely.
supervising your unit.
Yeah.
Eric is quality person and supervisor and leader.
Well, I got to say, from the agencies in the Inland Empire, Eric had a big influence on a lot of our units because of his leadership abilities, his vision for, and we incorporated a lot of it at Riverside based off of what Eric was doing over at Ontario. Because again, and we've done the same thing with you, Jack, from what LAPD was doing. We all take what is good, just like you're trained, just like you're taught when you're a brand new street cop, right? And you're going through FTO. Hey, if you have an FTO and you really like what he's doing, you take that, you put it a part of what you're doing and make that into your repertoire. And then the guys that you don't like, or the bad FTOs, learn from that and don't be that guy. Right.
Yes.
And so Eric had a huge impact on a lot of us out in the Inland Empire because, we weren't these big agencies like LAPD, LA County Sheriff's Department that had so many resources and so many personnel. We're small units where even our sergeants and lieutenants weren't pilots. And that was, I think, probably the biggest struggle that we had was you're now trying to, as the pilots and the TFOs, educate these rotational leaders that would come through every 3 years to what aviation is about. And that is a huge struggle. And I know, and that was one of the questions that I wanted to bring up in this group, because I think what we've identified listening to everyone talk is that our definition of leadership is a little bit skewed, because what we look at as stars and bars on the collars don't necessarily make what leadership is. Leadership is a trait that some people possess, others don't. We can develop that in people, just like what Clay was talking about. Identify them early, because you are going to have those leaders. One of the, coming out of the military, we look at leadership as, the guy with the stars and bars on his collars. But what I think the military does really well is if you're not cutting the mustard as a leader, they're going to remove you. You are going to end your career because, it's career suicide really. But if you are not an effective leader, and they've identified that, you are not going to get promoted. You will get passed over and you will get booted out of the military. Unfortunately, in law enforcement, we don't have that capability really. And so it ends up going down the road of, screw up and move up, right? Because, well, if this guy's not cutting it, let's just put him over here in this assignment and, promote him to this area where he doesn't have an effect on, the organization as a whole. But what ends up happening in smaller agencies is you don't have that. I remember talking, and Jack, I'm sure you can speak to this, but I've got buddies at LAPD that they were like, oh yeah, that guy, oh yeah, he's, in charge of a broom closet at, some police station somewhere. And he's, and I'm not being facetious, but almost to that point, right? Like, oh, that guy is in charge of the arms room at 77th Division or something like that. And oh, so what does he do? He hands out, shotguns every day at roll call or whatever, and tasers or whatever. But they put him in that assignment because maybe he's a problem child and they don't want him out on the streets, or they don't want him wherever. Smaller agencies, you have a really hard time hiding people like that, but, and I hate to say it, unions tend to, protect people that shouldn't be, necessarily protected, I guess is the best way to put it. So I think that kind of hamstrings what we do in law enforcement. We had a battalion commander when I was in Iraq. She was horrible, absolutely horrible. They rolled in, they did a command climate survey. We filled out these forms. Next thing you know, we've got a bunch of people coming down and asking questions as to, interviewing people as to what we've experienced. And next thing you know, she's on an airplane getting flown out of country, and we've got a new battalion commander, and it completely changed the trajectory of our unit at that point in theater. We can't do that in law enforcement. And I remember asking, well, why don't we do command, leadership, command climate surveys? Well, A, nobody wants to hear what, we have to say. And B, what do you do with that person? Like you can't, fire this captain or lieutenant. He's going to be protected. I don't know what the answer is to that. I do know that what we can do is affect the for these smaller units, and I guess that would be the question I would pose to the panel, is how do we, in these structures where we have non-aviator lieutenants and sergeants and whatnot, how do we help them as, like, because everybody here is an aviator and can speak to that. How do we help those people that are put in those positions to lead these aviation units with no aviation experience?
And Clay, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm not probably the guy to talk about that, because I'm not in that environment. But I think that leader placed in that position is really put at a disadvantage, and it's not his or her fault. So there's resources out there, the apps and stuff to get them familiar with the aviation world. But again, I don't know how you take someone and put them into something that's so specialized. You want to take somebody and put them over a gang unit, put them over a neighborhood police officer unit, put them over motors. That all gels with being a blue suit cop, right? I understand that. I'm going to be on a radio. I'm going to be going to calls. I'm going to be doing these things. I'm patting people down. This aviation stuff, a lot like K9, it's a different deal. It is. And I don't know how you take that brand new promoted 3 or 4 year sergeant and put him in aviation and expect him to be successful. I really don't.
Terry, let's jump to you.
It's a great question, and there's no easy answer. So for me, it's a partial answer, and I'll stay with this theme of favorite quote. You can't have great followership without great leadership, but the converse is true. You can't have great leadership without great followership. So there's a job we have to do as followers when we're working for that leader. We have to do our part, even though he's maybe not in the right. We owe it to them to give them that chance and to manage him up, make him look good in that regard, to a point. And I'm not saying if you do that, you have fixed the problem, but you've done your part, right? And you can sleep well at night to that part. In aviation, that challenge gets tougher because now we have potentially a dangerous situation. And that's where we have to draw the line. And if safety is first, make it first. And sometimes that's making very hard decisions and very hard stances. And as professionals, whether we're leaders or followers, at times we have to make those calls. It's an unfortunate situation, and if you ask me, it's probably one of the number one challenges that face police aviation is how we develop or lack of develop and place those managers in those positions. One last comment to it, John. It's not an absolute that's what's going to happen. Some people, as I believe Clay said, they do have those natural traits, and they do have that ego in check. And you can get a guy in there with no aviation experience that will excel in that aviation leadership role. You have to look at what he's doing well, though. He's put his ego in check. He's tapping into those SMEs, and he's making it work for him and for the unit.
Go ahead, Jack.
Great stuff. Really good stuff. The ego part of it is so huge. Even though our sergeants and lieutenants ended up learning to fly, they were never going to be at the level of the people that they're supervising. Never. It's impossible. There's pilots that were flying 5,000 hours a year, and the supervisors flew occasionally, and it came down to personality. It really did. The supervisors, whether it was a sergeant, lieutenant, or a captain, it didn't matter. If they came in with an open mind, and they came in humble, and they came in wanting to be a sponge. I mean, a true sponge, and absorb everything from safety to maintenance to tactics to missions to, whatever it was, the tactical flight officer program. If they came in with an open mind and went to the subject matter experts and learned, they succeeded. We had fantastic supervision that came in with that, parking that ego at the door. As a matter of fact, there used to be a sign outside our roll call room. It was there for when I first got there. It said, "Park your ego at the door," and that's so valuable in this position. Because I agree with you guys saying we're kind of throwing people into a very unique position. They're used to telling cops what to do. Clay nailed that. But this isn't that. There's now the FARs are more important than the police officer manual. And some could never absorb that. I'll just give you a quick example of a captain and that just didn't understand what we did and why we did it and how we did it and wanted to change the world without knowing anything. And him sitting in on a briefing one day about shooting from the helicopter. And safety officer, chief pilot, lead pilot of that unit happened to be me, and a few others. We were all chiming in on whether to go to training that day with SWAT. And there was something going on with it, had to do with a fire and some weather stuff. And we went around the room, and it was unanimous. We're not going. We're not going today. The risk is too great. We can't mitigate it. There's things out of our control. It's just training. We do it twice a month. See you in 2 weeks. Unanimous. And the captain was just listening in, and he said, well, if this was a real incident, you guys be going right now. You understand that. And he walks out the door. And we're all sitting there like, did he just say that? Stunned. And then laughing and knowing that our sergeant is going to have to go explain to him that, guess what? The pilot in command makes that decision. The safety officer can make that decision. The chief could tell you to go. And if the pilot in command says, I'm unable to go because of the FARs, because of visibility, or because of weight and balance, or because of whatever the reason, it doesn't matter what it is, the million things that we all had to deal with, that you're not going. It's different from the normal police work where the captain goes, charge, and you go, charge. It's different in aviation. And the ones that accepted that from day one succeeded. The ones that didn't accept that and said, no, I'm used to sending these one-year coppers telling them what to do. And that's what I'm going to do with all you 15-year coppers that have more experience in this aviation field than I've ever had. They did not succeed, and they struggled. And some left by choice, and some left by pressure. And at times, it actually affected safety. This particular captain I'm thinking of, I actually wrote an article for Vertical about, and I just took every bad thing about how he managed and put it into that article because it covered all of them, all the ones that I've talked to people around the world about, as many of you have. I mean, Bryan talking about how many of his emails had to do with that. Even that number stunned me, Bryan. But in the big scheme of things, I'm going, I shouldn't be surprised at that, because I heard it so many times. And it comes down to, once again, just to finish, ego and personality. You come in humble and you want to learn, you'll succeed. You will, in any specialized unit. But if you come in thinking you're going to change the world and you don't even know what the FAR stands for, that's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Just to tag on that, Jack, is the Army, I think, does a really good job of developing leaders. And the reason why they do that is because a division general doesn't necessarily know about every unit and every mission under his division. What he does is he surrounds himself with his subject matter experts. Yes. And I think one of the problems in law enforcement, and what may be the issue that we're, I think, truly dealing with, is when you're a street cop and you walk into let's just say a domestic violence, you already know the answer. You already know somebody's going to jail. You already know, you have all these things. You walk into that room and you take control, right? That's what we're taught in the police academy, is that you have to take control of that scene, take command of whatever's going on. I think it's a hard transition when you now are a police officer that promotes into, say, a sergeant's rank, and now you're put in charge of brand new cops working in patrol, because where do all the brand new supervisors go? Right to graveyard shift, right? Where all the brand new cops are. And then you're now a brand new supervisor training brand new cops, and you tend to get into that micromanagement style of leadership because you're not really sure what you're supposed to be doing yet. You haven't really figured out, as a brand new supervisor, what your job is. So what do? You go out and you micromanage your officers. Well, that's going to be, I think, even further when you end up in that aviation unit without any aviation experience. And now you don't know what to do to lead these guys who don't really need to be told how to go out and do their job, because they know how to do their job. What they need is that support. They need like Terry said, removing the barriers, find out what they need, what they want, and what makes them angry, and then try to eliminate, what they can and provide the things that they need. And I think that's where, military leadership tends to do it a little bit better, because they understand that, like, hey, I don't need to know everything about everything. I just need to bring the people in and lean on those experts. But I think what we have is we have an ego problem, like we've already talked about, where, oh, I'm in charge. I need to know everything about this, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to learn it. I do agree with, yes, they need to go out, they need to read up, they need to get educated if they're going to be coming into an aviation unit and not understanding it. And I appreciate that. But at the same time, they can't just be like, well, I'm the leader, I'm making all the decisions, and not lean on their experts, subject matter experts, which are going to be those guys, like you said, that are the 15-year air unit pilots or TFOs that understand that and understand that mission more than they will ever understand it. And I think that's the Achilles heel, really, of airborne law enforcement.
And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, because in the military, you had varying ranks in the cockpit together, correct?
Yep.
I mean, and in the cockpit, rank doesn't matter, does it?
Correct.
Or it shouldn't. And we had that situation with sergeants and lieutenants flying, and 99% of them accepted that. The 1% that didn't accept that, no, I'm the sergeant or I'm the lieutenant, that created some incredibly dangerous issues and some really conflicts. So, we have a lot there's a lot we can learn from the military thinking, I believe. And you're lucky that you had that in you, that you can really analyze it.
Well, trust me, the military doesn't do everything right. I'll tell you that right now.
Of course not.
Not that, and none of us do, right? But I think that taking experiences or learning, looking at how the airlines do things, looking at how the military does things, because that's what the military did back in the early 90s, was develop the crew resource management and leaned on the airlines to bring that training to the military, to incorporate it into what we were doing to improve and increase, safety.
Right.
And so I think that, taking bits and pieces, just like like I said earlier about, like, from your FTOs, the ones that you like, pick and use some of those styles that they have and have demonstrated, use those. And I think that's where, if you go into a vacuum thinking that you know everything and you are not open to it, our department would definitely put a SWAT sergeant in charge of the aviation unit without blinking an eye. But if you were to say, well, why don't you take an aviation sergeant or, one of the aviation guys or a patrol sergeant and put him in charge of the SWAT team, they'd laugh you right out of the office. Like, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? Like, so I think that putting an emphasis on, one specialized unit over another is not a good, it doesn't look good, but also it's silly in the fact that when you're talking about aviation, but again, it's that lack of knowledge of what it takes to go out and fly an aircraft, and melding of these two careers together of, the FARs and the FAA and everything that we need to know as police officers. So I think it's just short-sighted that they think that, we're bus drivers. We just go out and, operate a piece of equipment like a motorcycle because it's a police motorcycle. And that's not the case at all.
Agreed 100%.
Bryan, I'd like to shift to you now.
Yeah. And just, there's a few phrases you could walk into any air support unit in the world and say, and always get the same response. And one of those phrases is, I'm going to run aviation like we run patrol. And you will get the same look on everyone's face, like someone just farted in the room. Because in the history of law enforcement, that has worked exactly 0 times. And it means things are about to get really awful. And to even go beyond what you're saying, Jeff, if you go to patrol and say, how about we take just a civilian manager and put him in charge of the patrol shift, someone who's never been a cop before, and you get that same response, they'd laugh you out of the room. And that's what we're doing by taking a patrol supervisor and put him in charge of aviation. But back to your question about, a small unit, it is challenging because you don't have a huge cadre of people to choose from, because you're looking for three things. You have to have the institutional knowledge of aviation, which takes a long time, to really get a grasp of. And then you have to look for leadership skills, but also in most of these small units, you have manager skills too, because they don't give you support staff to handle all the purchasing and budgeting and scheduling and personnel management and all the other crap that leaves you sitting behind a computer all day when you're also supposed to be being a pilot and a leader. And it's up to the agency to identify what they have available and then what they're lacking and provide that training. If you have someone, just because you're a great pilot doesn't mean you're going to be a great leader or a great unit commander. And it may be because you just haven't had the training, and that's something we can fix with proper training. Or it may be it's just not your thing. You may have someone who's a great leader and manager, and we have the resources and ability, and as Jack said, that person has the right attitude to then learn the institutional knowledge that they need to do that job well. I worked for Ed Van Winkle when I first started flying, and Ed at the time was not a pilot. He didn't have a pilot's license, but he was a very high-ranking officer with the police department, and Ed always had a great attitude, and he would come out and ask. And I was not ready to be a leader because I was young in the industry. We had Richard Bray, and we had our mechanic Barney, who had been there for 1,000 years. And Ed always had the right attitude to ask the questions and trust what they said. And eventually he listened enough where he got bit by the fatal bug of aviation. And now he's a very accomplished pilot.
Now look at him.
But at the time, at the time he didn't have that. He just had the right attitude and the right leadership skills and great manager skills, phenomenal on those parts. But as Jack said, if you don't have the right attitude, then you come in, hey, I'm going to make my chops. I'm going to flex on the aviation unit, let everybody show that I have what it takes to push them around and make them do what I say. We're going to do it like patrol. And back on the APSA thing, we did the safety survey every year. And this is the safety survey. And consistently in the top 4 or 5 was management. Management was one of the top 4 or 5 safety concerns for the aviation units in our industry. And those phone calls I get and those emails I get, most of them would start with, hey, I got a new lieutenant who, we got this new major who called up today. I got this new supervisor who said this. And then they would just tell you the most ridiculous things. It was surreal sometimes. But it was always kind of the same thing. We have this new supervisor who came in, and now they want to do this, or they said, we can't do this anymore. If you turn down a mission, you have to write a memo to so-and-so. If we're not going to follow the POH limitations for the aircraft anymore because we just got to get it done. Just crazy stuff. This guy doesn't have a pilot's license, but, he knows the sheriff pretty well, so he's a new pilot. It was just unbelievable. And you still had the, hey, can you help us with inadvertent IMC? Can you help us with this maintenance or loss of control training problem? But for every one of those was 10, hey, we just got this new supervisor and you won't believe what they're doing.
Yeah, I think before I started the podcast, when I was working at RPD, I was in that vacuum of I just thought our department was just this one-off, kind of, I didn't see it as being a huge problem in law enforcement. And it wasn't until I left and started looking back, and then John and I started doing the podcast, and we'd bring guests on and talking offline, we'd find out that this is a huge problem, that's throughout our industry. Well, then obviously I listen to more than just the Hangar Z podcast. I actually don't listen to this at all because I don't like the sound of my own voice, but I started listening to other podcasts, and I found a law enforcement leadership podcast. And I'm sure some of you on the panel may have heard of Dr. Jack Enter, but he's written a book, and I got to pull it up because I always butcher the name or don't want to butcher the name of it, but Challenging the Law Enforcement Organization, Proactive Leadership Strategies. And he just updated it. There's a new edition that's out. But he has, there's like I think a 6 or 7 episode series on like Spotify of him talking about the issues. And it was like, and he even says in his one of the episodes where he's given this presentation to like a big audience of law enforcement officers, and this guy from like Nairobi comes up and he's like telling him like, you've been spying on our department because you just changed the names, but the people you're talking about, those are the people, this is my department. And he was very offended, and he was like, no, this like, but it's because like, I mean, listening to everyone on this panel talk, like we've all had these same experiences with the same. So we're not, just like Brian's always said, like we have never found a new way to crash a helicopter. We just keep doing the same things over and over again. And it's absolutely true. And I think we're doing the same thing in the leadership realm. And hopefully that, something like this is going to be what's going to, that having this medium now to be able to share these stories and let guys know that they're not in this alone, that this is a problem throughout our industry, but hopefully spark the young leaders that may be listening, and hopefully that guys are sharing this with, to maybe hear it from this panel of experts that this is a real problem, not just in airborne law enforcement, but I think in law enforcement as a whole.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of self-reflection. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yep.
I was going to say,
we'll come back to you.
In my life after law enforcement, I visited agencies from California to Washington to Texas to Florida to New York to New Hampshire, and the challenges are way more prevalent and similar than the success stories. Meaning, it doesn't matter what agency you go to in what state. Like you were like Jeff was saying, somebody's going to think you're talking about your agency from across the country, because the challenges are the exact same. The agencies who kind of have a really strong handle on the culture, the administration, the operational aspects, unfortunately, they're the anomalies. Your LAPDs, your Texas DPSs. It's unfortunate, but they're the anomalies, but that's just the nature of it. It's difficult because we talk about people coming in that don't have previous aviation experience, and as Jack alluded to, if they have the right mentality, they can absolutely learn. And I dealt with several supervisors at Riverside, and several of them were really good guys, but even the really good guys had no idea what was going on until about their second year in command.
Right.
Because the reality is, in aviation, it takes about 2 years before you really figure out which way is up. I mean, you think you have these moments of clarity, but the reality is, anybody who's being really honest will tell you that, man, I didn't really figure anything out until I've been in here a couple of years. You know how many times you were flying around as a TFO and you're looking for a guy in a red T-shirt and black shorts, and your pilot is looking across the cockpit while he's dodging news helicopters and everything else, and he's like, "Hey, is that the guy standing in the front yard right there?" And you're like,
"Right,
where are you looking?" And he reaches across your nose. "That guy right there. Oh yeah, that might be him." And of course it is. And you're sitting there going, well, how is this guy doing this? He's not even supposed to be doing what I'm doing. He's doing 9 other things, and he just found the suspect, and that's all I'm trying to do. But you learn that it's a skill set. It's situational awareness. It's multitasking. It's all of these things rolled into one. And it just doesn't come to anybody easily. It comes to some more easily than it does to others. But I think anybody who's successful at it and who's good at it has worked really hard to get to that place. And so it's difficult, because to just grab somebody And it was way more common in canines where you would get a guy out of patrol that had no canine experience. But the idea, our philosophy was always, we had a saying for new canine handlers, and it was good dog, shit handler. And the philosophy was, when the dog does something wrong, it's not the dog's fault, it's your fault. And that was across the board. And you realize that it took you about a year just to learn your dog and really get in tune. And it would take you almost another year to really kind of figure out all the other stuff. And air support was the exact same way, which is why I know Jack will verify this. So many canine handlers tend to assimilate into the aviation side with a little bit easier, because they're used to kind of the whole scene. They're used to having to absorb and digest a lot of information very quickly and then come up with a plan. And you're kind of doing the same thing in a helicopter. You're just doing it from the air as opposed to on the ground with a dog. And so the guys that we would see come out of the canine unit, they always just seem to have a little bit of a leg up. But, it's a challenge regardless of where you are. And another point that Bryan made that was a great point, and I think hasn't been addressed, was management. So in running an aviation unit, there's management responsibilities and there's administrative responsibilities. And they're two very, very different things. And I was fortunate in that I had a guy named Steve Valvo, who was my chief pilot, and he was my manager. And I was smart enough to know that he was a way better manager than I was. And so I left him to basically run the day-to-day, to manage the pilots and the TFOs and maintenance and the training. And then I would say, what do you guys need? What do you need to do what you need to do? And I'll go get it, because I've gotten very good at learning how to ask for things. I wasn't always good at it, but I learned after being said no to enough that there's a definite methodology of how you ask for things and when you ask for things. And so I decided that and Steve and I had this conversation after I retired, and I told him, I said, you were always a way better manager than I was. And I was at least smart enough to recognize that and know that was your lane. And so it's hard, because I think there's a lot of different facets. And I think a lot of the other thing is, a huge factor is, I think you have to share a certain amount of the framework that you're dealing with the people in your units, because there's all kinds of pressures, influences, guidelines that come down from upper administration. And I think a lot of times these administrators in these units, they don't want to be honest with people and say, listen, I've just been told that if we don't cut our budget by 15%, we might not have an air unit. And instead of figuring out a way to say that doesn't cause everybody to want to go, jump off a cliff, you have to be honest with people, and you have to share with them, hey, listen, we've got some budget concerns, guys. So we're going to have to learn how to maybe do some of the stuff we do a little bit more efficiently, a little bit more economically, fiscally responsibly. And I think if you share the framework that you're trying to work within with the people that you're working with and for, it goes both ways. You continue to develop the trust that hopefully you've already established. Because I think if you just stand there and say, a lot of supervisors supervise out of fear more than the desire to actually be successful. And we talk about why units don't have things, and there's a lot of people that are just afraid to go ask for things, because they're certain they're going to be told no, or they've seen other people ask for things and they've been told no. So I don't even know if there's a really good answer for it, but it's a really multifaceted problem. And, I think all you can do is try to network as much as you can, You talk about safety, and I don't know if anybody else did this, but my thing was we would take our risk managers on fly-alongs all the time. We were on a first name basis with the risk management department in our city. And if you want to talk about people that hold the purse strings and have the ability to get you things or get things approved immediately, it's a risk management department. And so by doing that, I would call and say, hey, my guys have a concern about this, or they say their helmets are wearing out, but we're told that our budget doesn't allow for us to buy new helmets. And you'd be surprised how fast a risk manager will get new helmets for the entire unit approved by just saying, hey, listen, buy these guys new helmets, because if they crash and their heads aren't protected, it's going to cost us so much more money than these stupid helmets are going to cost us. And so by networking and partnering with these different authoritative voices within your structure, you can have the ability to lobby for things that maybe otherwise would fall on deaf ears if it was just you saying, my guys need new helmets.
Yeah, I think most times people feel confined by the police department. They can only operate within the organizational guidelines that are set within that police department. And you thought outside the box there and establish relationships in places that could get things done where that couldn't have been done within the police department, at least not as efficiently, So I give you a lot of credit in doing that.
And it is true. It's institutional, right? I mean, you're brought up in these departments, and it didn't start with you. It started way before you were there. And there's all kinds of people that have preconceived ideas and knowledge about how things should be done or how things were done, and all of that stuff. And so it's not that you don't acknowledge those things or you don't respect those things. But I think you also have to say, hey, listen, what is my vision? And what do I think, where do I want this to go? And as long as that, in the end, leads to a productive, safe, and efficient operation that reflects positively on the city and everybody else that's involved, then you put the throttle down and you move forward. You just keep going.
Terry and Jack, I feel like both you guys, if I'm reading you right, looks like you have something to throw in there.
I'll just agree with Dr. Weidner. I concur, Doctor, completely with the canine thing that he said. Really, I mean, it almost felt, when I came from canine and went to the TFO job, it almost felt like cheating because it was a natural thing. It just was. And, it was being told, this is going to be the hardest thing you ever do. And I was like, this is going pretty good, but it was because of the canine part. It wasn't because of me. It was because of what I did for 5 years straight, every night, racing around the city with my hair on fire, chasing bad guys. So very, very good analogy there, Dr. Weidner. I like that.
Thank you, Dr. Schonely.
Thank you. You're welcome. Eric and I, we're distant relatives. We're very, very distant relatives. So I have to compliment him, and he has to compliment me.
Dr. Gray, I'll interject there then. I think, I think we've identified very heavily ego is the enemy in any leadership, right? So what's the good qualities, that are going to now make us effective? Eric, what I heard you say is political savviness, right? So as aviation leaders, we bridge that aviation / non-aviation gap, if you will. And that takes a political savviness to get that done, right? It's not good enough to have great missions, successful operations, standardizations. We now have to add that political savviness to be effective leaders to push that unit up the hill and to expand those operations, to grow those operations. The example you gave, I'd love your example of the helmets. It's a liability shift is what it is. And what it really is it's a political savviness of knowing when to take that liability shift of those worn helmets, in this case, to the right person at the right time, and that's a skill set that that obviously you have and many effective leaders have. So I think that's a trait that needs to be highlighted for sure, without a doubt. And I would take it one step further and just reemphasize what we've all said before. You as the leader aren't going to come up with all those ideas on our own. Some of them are going to come from our people. And that, what do you need? What do you want? What makes you mad? I want to, empowering, removing the barriers. What do you need? What do you want? What makes you mad? That doesn't mean we give up leadership and it's now in their hands. It doesn't mean that at all. We guide that. We focus on a culture that allows that. Truth be told, a strong leader is probably going to have a lot of the good ideas. That even stronger leader is going to have those ideas that his followers take ownership in, right? And instilling that taps into their drivers that are now going to carry that out. But get rid of the ego, have that political savviness, develop that political savviness, and you're on your road to pushing that unit up the hill, as the general would say.
I love it, Clay. I see your wheels spinning over there.
No, it's good stuff, and I have to self-reflect because empowering your people to do their job so important. I'm blessed that there's crews across the state of Texas right now doing airborne operations in our unit, and there are a wide variety of missions. The border is crazy right now, and we have a heavy presence there. And they just flew by recently here chasing a bad guy. None of those crews tonight have to call anybody to ask anything about anything that comes up in their job. So they have the responsibility to do good, but they also have the authority that goes with it. So, those crews, those pilot TFO crews are out there expected to make those decisions. And man, they just do make the good ones when they're left to do it. And so I'm blessed that I work for an agency that really empowers the people at the end to go do the good work. And the proof's in the pudding. Generally, they do. So it's interesting to hear these other perspectives on that, and talking political savviness with Eric. I mean, if you're watching anything going on the border, we're having to dance that dance all the time. I mean, there's no doubt that the politics can drive a mission, and especially when state government is having to take on the role that maybe federal government's usually doing. We become the arm in that. So that savviness is important, but at the same time, letting your people in that machine at that hangar at that time make those decisions is important. During Hurricane Harvey, there were hoists going on everywhere, and the Emergency Operations Center in Austin was calling the crews downrange in Houston, why are y'all not pulling people? Why are we not seeing downlink video of these hoists? And the crews are sitting, essentially the Home Depot parking lot with zero visibility. They can't get up. That storm just sat there, and there were pressures from the Emergency Operations Center to conduct rescues. But at the end of the day, the folks manning those machines in that parking lot made those decisions, and they were the best decisions they could make, and they weren't questioned. So I think when we talk about developing culture, that's the idea. That just culture is not something that the chief pilot writes up to satisfy an APSA requirement and puts over the urinal in the bathroom. It's actually, it is. It's, we care about the what and the why of what's wrong, not the who. We're going to get down to what can we do to make this system work better, instead of, I love Bryan Smith's analogy. He uses the whack-a-mole, mentality of when a problem comes up, we hit it, and then this one and this one. So anyway, that's it.
That culture didn't come overnight either, did it, Clay?
No, and it didn't. It took a long time, and that's kind of the other thing in this is in order to build that culture, it's not something we turn a switch on Monday morning. You got to let it grow, and we're going to step in it sometimes, and you have to own that as well. So I've seen so much change in my unit in 23 years of being out there, and it's all based on, in my opinion, solid leadership. leadership is what has taken us. Leadership of our department right now, I think, is at an all-time high, and that trickles down.
It's funny you say that. My partner and I one time went out. We got a call from our narcotics team that we supported with surveillance, and they were like, "Hey, we're following this target. It's a big deal. Can you guys get up and blah blah blah?" So we called our dispatch. We said, "Hey, we're going to be assisting, the team, whatever, outside the city." So next thing you know, we're over Los Angeles on this surveillance up at high altitude. So we can hear our city, we can hear our radios, and something fairly minor happened in our city. It wasn't a big deal, but somebody asked for the air unit, and they said, "Oh, they're 10-6 assisting somebody else." And by the time we got back to the hangar, we had a call or text or whatever from our lieutenant asking us to what the hell was going on. So we called him and we told him, "Hey, we got a call from the team. We went out, we this and that." So we made a decision on the fly, and basically we got. We didn't get in trouble, but we joked that, the only time we've ever gotten in trouble in our jobs is when we were doing our jobs, as opposed to if we would have said, "No, we're not responding," nobody would have ever known about it. Nobody would have ever complained. But here we were supporting one of our customers on a big deal. And we were now being called on the carpet by the lieutenant because he didn't know that we were out there doing this. And it's like, well, how many boxes do we need to check before we just go and support the customer and get the mission, the job done? And then maybe, hey, we could follow it up with an email. We could follow it up with a text message, whatever. But, these guys are calling us. They're on the move. They need an aircraft overhead. And we went and did what we thought was the right thing to do to support what needed to be done at the time. And the only reason he knew about it was because then somebody, another lieutenant, whatever, texted him and was like, "Oh, what are your guys doing outside the city?" And had no clue. But we did that all the time, in the air unit at the time. So I think those, what you said is, Clay, is empowering your crews to do what is the right thing to do at the right time. And living by that is huge, because then I think it gets buy-in from the crews, right? Because now they don't feel like, well, every time we got to do something, we got to call Clay or text him and, get permission. Mother, may I?
Well, and I think it's important too that the vision of that leadership is clear. I say it all the time. If I'm in kind of a pickle and trying to figure something out, what would the director want me to do? What would Steve McGraw expect of me out of this moment? And I never have any doubt. I know exactly what he wants us to do, and I know how he wants us to do it. And boy, that makes it easy to do my job. I mean, we have that mission statement to protect and serve the citizens of Texas. That's on every squad car. That is not something that we just flip out there. That is our duty. And it's done through integrity, excellence, accountability, and teamwork as core values. And that message has been pushed down. So to your point, Jeff, I think a lot of what's going on in law enforcement across the board right now is what is a department's mission right now, truly, right?
Yeah.
What are you really there doing? And these chiefs are trying to navigate that. So having a clear purpose for your people and what their mission is makes the job a lot easier.
Yeah. We had a supervisor. I worked for him as a sergeant, a lieutenant, and he was eventually a deputy chief. And he had a saying that was, "If you're morally right and tactically right, run with it. You're going to get backed up." I took that to heart, and I think that's what we're talking about right now. Is if you know what you're doing, you know what you were doing on that surveillance, Jeff. You know what your guys are doing, and you used to not. If you're morally right and tactically right, we're going to back you up. That's good leadership. They give you a little bit of room, but you know the parameters. It's clear what the parameters are.
Yep, agreed.
Bryan, I've seen you about to speak a couple times. Do you want to chime in?
It's just a nervous tick that I have. It's like that.
Plus, it's past your bedtime.
Yeah. As you can tell on the camera, I'm way behind on beauty sleep, and it's just beyond hope. I'm taking notes here. I wish I should show you. I have like 5 Post-it notes I'm up to now. And I think that kind of goes back to, with the leadership thing and the networking and talking. And I'm the same, somebody said earlier, and I'll reflect the same. Every single person on this call, I have called before and have asked for advice and help. Just recently, we had a kind of a BS call, get dispatched. One of the guys is sitting there, and they're like, "Oh, this is crap." But you know what, JGF. And I know, Eric, I got that from you. It was just go fly. Just go fly. I mean, that's your influence.
Ours was a little bit more graphic. It was actually JFG.
What does that mean, Eric?
Hey, this
What
is
does
a
that mean?
family show.
I'm not following, Eric. What?
Just Foxtrot Golf.
But and we talked about the obstacles, and Terry talked about removing the obstacles. I think that's really, and especially when we're talking about the smaller size units, is we put people in leadership positions. We need to identify the obstacles that are going to be in the way of that person we're putting in the position. And there's no one formula. It depends on who we're putting in the position, what their background is. And we've already, talked about this to death, but what are those obstacles? And then how can we help resolve them? One of them, if it's the ego, I think I might move on to the next guy. If that's just too much to try and fix, there has to be someone else. But for the other things with the leadership, the admin responsibilities or the aviation background, we can fix that stuff if you take the time to identify it and find the resources and put it in. And they're all out there. We also have to recognize those things need to be addressed and are obstacles for whoever we put in. And, one of the big challenges for me going in after having been a pilot and I had some managerial experience before, but now, just the simple act of managing the flight times on the aircraft so they don't come into inspection at the same time and stay up. People don't talk about that. You put some guy who's been a pilot for 10, 15 years. Hey, good luck. You're the new chief pilot. And they have no idea. The line pilots really don't know what's going on to do that or keep the parts inventory ahead of time or the bidding process for this stuff or the budgeting process. If we don't take the time to get that obstacle out of the way, the guy's going to have a hard time and he won't be able to lead because he spent too much time sitting at the computer. You walk into a little flight school with 4 helicopters, there's a scheduling person sitting there. There's a admin assistant sitting there doing all that work for him. There's a chief pilot who's scheduling that stuff. There's another operations or a manager of the business. Now you take a small unit and you make one person do all 4 of these, and fly the shift once in a while. And I'm not going to show you how to do any of that stuff. Well, no wonder they have a hard time with it. So, but those obstacles are there. And one thing that I just made a note I want to get back to, as we remove those obstacles, the thing that, comes back to me a lot is we take the time to hire professionals. We recruit professionals. We require they have the proper experience and all this stuff. And then we don't listen to them. We don't treat them like professionals. Just be a yes man. Just sit there and tell me yes all the time. And I may or may not listen to you depending on how I feel that day. And, that's irritating. And we've already talked about that. But it's not always negative stuff. And Terry, you teach that class and you talk about team building. And I think that's huge. And if you look at the kind of people, I always talk about, they're professionals, treat them like professionals. They're pilots. They're aviators. They're into this because they watched Top Gun as a kid. They watch Star Wars and like the fighter pilots in it. They watch all those movies. They watch Blue Thunder. They better have. That better be a prerequisite for coming into the movie. They watch these movies. They love this stuff. They love the patches. They love the camaraderie. They love walking in. I love when I go to LAPD and I see the buzzard up there and I got the shirt and I wear it. They love that stuff. And the ability to identify those things and put these guys together once in a while, and it doesn't have to be always this rough, negative stuff that unfortunately has to be done, but stepping back once in a while and just looking at those fun things and building them together as a team, I think is a huge leadership thing that law enforcement, again, in general, has kind of lost sight of that camaraderie. We go up and do the regionals. I love doing the regionals in Canada. I love doing them in Canada because usually they have an event at one of their lodges. And you go in there and this is awesome. There's a place for the cops to go after work and they get together and they play pool And I remember one of them had all their steins on the wall, and everyone in that lodge had a stein with their name on it. And I thought, recently, and again, Terry, I listened to your class, and I at Reno, I listened to it again. I'm like, you know what? I need to step back and look at some fun team building things as a leadership skill to get these guys together. And we've got guys making insignia patches, and I thought, everybody needs a call sign, and which can be tricky, because we got to be careful. These call signs don't show up on the news, and
Doctor.
we don't have to answer for that, doctor. But little things like that, are a big deal to the guys. And my wife says, think about when you were back flying the line. What did you want your boss to do? And get together, have a barbecue. Have these fun little things. Now, everybody has a call sign. We have a stein with a call sign on it. And it didn't take much, but that's just another one of these leadership skills I think we lose sight of. And I think law enforcement actually has a great tradition of, and we're kind of losing that a little bit, that camaraderie. And,
Yeah.
Getting together, the choir practice, and, I know those can go the wrong way, but just those kind of things to build a group.
That's where they sit around and drink tea.
Yeah. Yeah. But the hard stuff, you have to let it brew for a long time.
That's because all these young kids are on TikTok, Brian. That's the problem. They're staring at their phone.
Here we go. We're going to start church with Clay again.
Brian, that's I think great stuff, and that love you talk about that these people have for all these individual items. I think you add to that list as the leader, we have to have a love for the people, right?
Yeah.
People that we're leading. And I don't mean that in a wishy-washy way. I mean that you don't have to like them, but how can we be leaders of people if we don't love people, the human behavior, the love of seeing them succeed and seeing them develop, seeing them climb that hill, so to speak. I think that's a trait. Number one, get rid of the ego, have that love of people so I'd love to hear you say that and now apply that to the leadership role is critical, I think.
Well, I think it's what it makes us successful as a whole sorry, Brian. I just think it makes us successful as law enforcement officers to love people, right? I mean, sometimes we lose sight of that, like what our true mission is, and that's to support, from the aviation side is to support our men and women out there. But what are we doing as a collective agency is we're supporting our communities. We're supporting the people that are out there. And a lot of times as street cops, we get jaded. We lose sight of that. I think as what we can do on the aviation side is never forget that. Never forget that, the reason why we're there is for the people on the ground, that are out there, the men and women that are putting their butts on the line every day. And we have to love them in order for us to, do what's right by them and then that will translate over to the community that we should also have ownership of and love. I mean, I absolutely love the community that I served, Riverside. I had ownership. I lived just outside the city. I felt like that was my city, and I wanted to do everything I could to protect those people, just like my family, just like I would protect anybody that came to my house. And I think that's where, Terry, what you've always said about loving people has always really resonated with me, because I think that over time people can lose sight of it, in the job, on the job. And we can't. We have to. And if we do that, we're going to foster that environment that's going to create great leaders.
Yeah, this conversation's been awesome. There's a lot of questions that are unaddressed at this point. But I feel like at some point we're going to have to come back and bring you guys on and address these questions, because there's a lot more to cover. We've barely scratched the surface of the issues that are facing not just law enforcement leadership, but more specifically law enforcement aviation leadership. But before we close out, I'd like to go around and ask any of you guys what your closing thoughts are, if you have any, and then we'll go from there. So Clay, we'll go to you.
Oh, wow. Well, I just want to thank the folks here, and not to leave anybody out, but Jack Schonely, you taught me a lot about this job, and I wouldn't be where I am without you, and I am humbled to be here amongst you guys. And I care about each one of you deeply. and I appreciate everything you've done for me. Because everybody on this panel has done something for me to get me where I am, and I am blessed to be able to do this job. I can't believe that I am allowed to do what I do. It's a blessing. So thank you, men, all of you.
Thank you, Clay.
I'll go next on there, John. I'm looking at 7 people here that I know are great leaders, that have their ego in check, that have a political savviness, that love people. I'm going to single out 2 of them, and that's John and Jeff on this podcast, and your true passion of why you do this, and it's to fix some of those problems we're identifying. You know, we ask the question, how do we do these things? This is one avenue of how we do it. You know, it's a partial answer again to that. So thank you guys for what you do. Thank you for having the passion. Thank you for having the love of the people and the love of what you're doing. It comes across loud and clear, and it's greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Terry. This concept was kind of born out of a conversation that we had in Austin. I don't know if you remember it was me and Terry and Clay and Jeff sitting around the Hangar Z booth at Echo at their public safety aviation conference. And we had this impromptu conversation about leadership. And I wish we could have recorded that particular conversation, because that was gold, And I remember thinking as we left, I'm like, how could I recapture that exact conversation? And the only way I could think to make it better was to bring Eric and Jack and Bryan on board and add their expertise and experience and knowledge into this, because each of you guys added a different element to the whole thing that makes it great. So thank you, everybody. But Terry, thank you for your sentiments and your support. All of you guys have supported us in the podcast and allowed us to reach the people that we've reached through your voice. It's never been about Jeff or I. It's always been about you guys that are bringing the expertise and knowledge. And again, it wouldn't be what it is without you guys speaking, and I appreciate that. So Jack, let's move to you in closing.
Well, now that Clay made me cry, I'm going to have to lighten it up. Thank you. So Clay is always too kind to me. I'm honored to be included with all of you. And John and Jeff, I'm with Terry. I mean, you're doing this for the right reasons, and you're reaching out and covering important topics, and just keep doing what you're doing. And I'll leave it on a light note. Mongo only pawn in game of life. Sometimes we feel like pawns, and there are TFOs and pilots out there that feel like they're just being shifted around. But you've got to, at some point, we can't just complain about something. We got to do something about it. And everybody on this panel has done that. Everybody, some of you, a lot, and that makes a difference. And it helps our leaders. If you're willing to step up and say, hey, Sergeant, I'm about to complain about this, but I'm stepping up. I'll be the one to take that project and run with it. It's important that we don't just complain about leaders. We do something about it ourselves. And I know everybody here has done that. So, again, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. Like I said, initially when you brought you on the podcast, I remember sitting in your class, an auditorium of what seemed like 1,000 people. It may have been close to that. And here I am getting to chat with you in a small group. So I'm thankful for that.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, John.
But, yeah. Bryan, I'd like to hear from you.
To echo what Terry said, and also Jeff, I think the important thing for people to realize as they're listening to this, Jeff said you thought you felt like maybe you're on an island and all the problems you had were isolated to that agency. And, we've said several times, this is just a universal struggle that it seems like everybody is having or has from time to time. And the only way to get forward and to deal with it and get past it and survive is as a community and as a group. And I've reached out. Any success that I've had, it has come from the people I've reached out to. And I'm not particularly smart. I'm just smart enough to have enough good phone numbers in my phone and contacts to know somebody to call and somebody to call and get an answer to. And for anybody listening, know that this community is out here, and there's the 7 people here, and there's a lot of people available that it's just a phone call. and you're not the only one who's struggling with it. And then the other thing I think I need to remind myself in closing is, we talk about leadership, and it's real easy to fall down that rabbit hole of complaining about everyone else, and I have to look back and point the finger at myself, and I've got all these notes in front of me as things that I can do better at that, and I should do better, and I should try that, and just to know that one of these obstacles to better leadership in aviation might be me, and what things do I still have in place that I'm not doing well and can do better, and find a way to better serve my guys so they not only stay safe and do the job better, but enjoy it. Because as Clay said, this is an awesome job. There's no reason for this not to be fun and amazing. And tonight at that 50-year anniversary, I saw guys who have been flying from the 70s up to people who just got their pilot's license this morning.
Wow!
Congratulations, Justin Gould. And I saw the same conversation through the whole hangar, all different ages, everybody standing there talking with their hands, telling lies and war stories, and just talking about aviation, and smiles, big smiles across the whole thing, and for good reason. So I think it's incumbent on me as a leader to try and foster that as well. And I need to do a little bit of self-reflection and see what are the things that I'm doing, maybe not as well as I could be. So, but again, thank you guys for the forum and the ability for us all to talk together and remind everyone out there, we're all in this together.
Yeah, Terry brought up checking your ego. I mean, that statement alone tells me right there that you've done just that. You're constantly striving to be better, and that's huge. And then to what Jack said about, not just like complaining about something, but finding a solution to it. You spent 10 years at APSA as a safety manager, and that was something that you did. One, you had a passion for it, you're good at it, but you found something that needed some work, and you stepped in and made a big impact, and undoubtedly saved many lives as a result of your work.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Bryan,
true,
for your
Bryan.
efforts.
Absolutely the truth.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we were talking about Jack.
No,
Me?
we're talking about
I
you.
didn't do anything.
You're amazing.
And self-depreciating humor
no,
goes a long way too.
I'm just trying to keep up with the company that I keep. That's all. Thank you, guys.
And I will thank you.
Thank you.
And Eric, sorry you're not forgotten again.
That's okay. I think obviously I have a huge amount of respect for what you guys have done. I've always been a John Gray fan from the second before you were in the unit, and I wanted you to be in the unit because you were one of those guys that if I had to describe you, I would just say he gets it. Like, it's that simple. He just gets it. I don't have to go into a lot of explanation. You were one of those guys that would just always kind of be able to absorb and go in the right direction. And I think it's ironic that you found Jeff, who was a neighbor, but now is halfway across the country, and you guys formed this relationship and have this passion to share this knowledge. It's amazing. So thank you for that. And once again, I'm humbled to have been on this panel with people that are way out of my league as far as I'm concerned. And it's not the first time I've been on a panel like this either. I've been on several, and I always end up looking around going, how did I get here? who canceled? And they said, hey, we can get Weidner to show up. He's always hanging around. Because it's just the amount of knowledge, institutional memory that exists here in this group of people is amazing, and it traverses the entire United States and the globe, because you've got these guys that have traveled all over the world talking to aviation units and police units and training people and guiding people and mentoring people, and it's humbling when you think of it in that framework. And the other thing that when Jeff said, I don't know if we answered the question, I don't think it's so much about the question as it is or the answer. He said, I don't know if we've answered it. And I don't think it's so much about the answer as it is asking the question. And I think that's the function of what you guys are doing. And sometimes it's bringing unique stories or perspectives to people that otherwise wouldn't be able to experience it. But in other cases like today, I think it's just asking the question, because people it's going to generate all kinds of introspective thought and evaluation, not only based on what was said in the podcast, but just based on what people experience in their own everyday lives. So I think that's the other incredibly important part about what you're doing is it's not that you have to answer every question. It's more that you ask every question.
Yeah, that's huge. I think there's a lot of questions that are rhetorical in nature that we've talked about, right? There's no silver bullet for any of these things because so many agencies are different structurally. You know, what might work for us in Ontario may not work for Texas DPS or Riverside PD or LAPD or Arizona DPS, you know, like just because of the way it's structured, it won't work. And then introspection is a big part of it too. You know, I remember, well, first of all, going back to what you said, I think the only reason I got into air support was because I bugged you nonstop. Every time I saw Eric, I'm like a leech on his leg. Hey, when can I come up? And then I got selected as a part-time guy. Same thing. Hey, when can I come up as a full-time guy? And then I got a TFO spot. Hey, when can I be a pilot? Just nonstop. But, you know, being introduced to air support under your leadership, my belief was that all aviation programs ran the way you ran our program, and all hangars were as clean as our hangar. You know, I remember probably my second year in aviation, we flew to some other Southern California agency. I won't say who it was. We land and go in their hangar, and there's like tumbleweeds blown through their hangar. There's feral cats fighting in there. There's parts all over the place. And I'm like, what the hell is this? You know, I'm not used to this. I'm used to being able to eat off the hangar floor. So I think that was
the first
moment
time
like,
John and I met, by the way. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, that's great.
That's why we're always meowing on Bravo. But
that's right.
But yeah, I think that was the first time I realized, like, hey, what you've got going as far as your leadership style and everything else is not normal. And then again, through the podcast, we've learned that, you know, a lot of agencies are struggling with issues of leadership. And like Bryan attested to with his survey, you know, it's one of the top 4 problems that's being reported nationwide, if not worldwide. Bryan, I know you've got a lot of international contacts. And you could probably attest to that. That's something you're seeing worldwide as well.
Yeah, you go into, you know, anywhere, you know, Europe, South America, you get the same complaints, different accent. That's it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Same challenges. It's universal.
And we have noticed as we've started to expand, you know, our interview base into Europe and Australia, you know, the culture and experiences that we have in North America are very, very similar to the rest of the world. And, you know, we're using the same equipment, the same tools. We share the same culture. So it's been really neat to kind of identify that and see that, hey, we're all doing the same things and get along so well. So it's fun to see that. And again, the leadership thing's I'm sure it's a worldwide issue. So again, thank you guys for your
Florida's like 2 different countries.
Especially now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. And before we sign out, I just want to have Jeff with his closing thoughts.
I just want to say thank you, gentlemen. Dan Fucher said it best in his interview when, you know, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and to be sitting here with the 5 of you who are really the giants in the industry, whether you want to admit it or not, is really humbling for John and I to have these discussions, to recapture what we discussed with Clay and Terry in Austin. I didn't think we were going to be able to do it. I mean, because it was just natural, but this is a natural conversation that we've just had. The reason why we didn't get through all the questions that we had, but I think we've covered most of the topics, is I think a testament to what you have done to lead our industry. Granted, you know, our Bryan's unit 50 years old, my old unit 50 years old a couple years ago. You know, a lot of these agencies have been around a long time. So we're standing on those shoulders. You're standing on those shoulders. But it's not a matter of what started in 1972. It's a matter of what's going on now. And that's what we talked about. It's always constantly evolving. And so over time, you know, we're going to hand off these reins. You're going to hand off these reins, Clay and Bryan. The rest of us are now out of airborne law enforcement as a you know, day-to-day job. But you're going to hand over those reins eventually. And that's what builds this industry. It's what you took over from somebody else, and we always want to make it better. And I think this is a way that we're going to continue to make this industry better. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for your friendship. You know, John and I both just absolutely love having the opportunity to sit and talk with all of you individually over a beer or on a podcast. It's just it's really uplifting and enlightening to hear what you have to say. So thank you for sharing it with everyone.
On a side note, Fooch just retired. His retirement ceremony is tomorrow at their hangar at SPSO, and so congratulations to him. Retired as lieutenant. The guy was he could very well be a part of this panel, and if I could bring one person on, he would be the one I bring on. So
yeah, definitely,
congratulations, Fooch.
Yeah, thanks. Congratulations.
Enjoy your retirement, and yeah. So until we meet up again, cheers, fellas, and thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z Podcast.
Thank
See
you
you
all
guys.
very much.
All right,
Good
cheers.
seeing everybody.
Be safe.
Thanks,
Good to see
guys.
you.